Good afternoon. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Nataliia Zmiivska, and I am the student of the Department MST of Kharkiv National University of Radio Electronics. The topic of my report is Design of Electronic Multimedia Textbook by the Order of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. During design an electronic multimedia textbook, Tactical Training, Mechanized Squad, commissioned by the Military Law Institute of the Yaroslav Mudry National Law University. The task was to create a design. The main requirement for the design of an electronic multimedia tactical training publication is to meet the subject matter of the discipline and the characteristics of the target audience. At the same time, the guiding document on the use of graphic style in visual communication of Armed Forces of Ukraine based on the association of color exclusively with the Armed Forces of Ukraine, its branches and forces, regulates the use of uniform colors for these structural units in all types of military publications, resources. In addition, only monochromatic page filling is allowed. This approach makes it difficult to create a modern design of an electronic tactical training publication in terms of color scheme. Firstly, it's difficult to evoke an association with a variety of tactical action on a monochrome background. Secondly, not all graphic objects related to the topic will look harmonious on the screen of the publication, with the background being, for example, the monochrome color uniform or step. In addition, such a design doesn't fully meet the characteristic of the target audience, which is young people, cadets, students, mostly male. There is also a problem with the introduction of the graphic style of the Armed Forces of Ukraine into the design of an electronic publication, due to the fact that the guideline provides for the use of only one basic UAF send font for all types of media, and it is quite difficult to achieve contrast and highlight the necessary information in this case. In addition, the UAF send font doesn't provide the italics, which also needs to be addressed. Therefore, the purpose of the study is to determine the information structure and find ways to solve the problems of introducing the graphic style in military communication of the Armed Forces of Ukraine into the design of an electronic multimedia tactical training publication. During the Russian-Ukrainian war, this is very relevant. In the course of the design process, when initially choosing the color scheme of the screens, we use a generally accepted approach of focusing on the specifics of the subject matter and interests of the target audience without taking into account the requirements of the guidelines. The background of the screen's pages was chosen to be the color of the field military uniform pixie, camouflage coloring made up of a combination of spots in the shade of green, protective, gray and brown, which was intended to symbolize field conditions, purely military work, that is combat, which is the subject of tactical training. To highlight the screen titles, it was to decide to create a box at the top of the screen by overlaying a translucent layer, rectangular shape, and the obtaining a background blur effect, frosted glass. The menu buttons were to be filled with a gradient brown color, dark along the contour and light in the center, with color animation when the mouse cursor was moved. According to the authors, the use of such technology to create a color scheme should have to attach the target audience as much as possible, given that it is emotional perception that determines the need for cadets, students, to have elements that stand out from the gray mass and disrupt the usual routine flow of media consumption. But such a design decision didn't comply with the rules of the graphic style of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Therefore, the task was to redesign the design of the publication in such a way as simultaneously ensure compliance with the graphic style of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which embodies simplicity, style, historicity, and restraint, and at the same time find original solution for reflecting the subject matter of the manual and the interest of the target audience in the design. To implement this task, the concept of creating a color scheme provided for using the color uniform for the background of the title field and the color step for the background of the screen. This decision was justified by the fact that the color uniform is the official color of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and symbolized everything related to military affairs, the duty to defend the motherland. The color step is the official color of the ground forces and symbolizes belonging this type of armed forces, the primary unit of which is a mechanized detachment, the action of which are considered in the manual. In addition, this color is associated with grass, field conditions, the battlefield, which corresponds to the subject of study. As a result, a sketch of the screen was obtained, the design of which, although it meets both the requirements of the management and the recommendation of the working group, and in the principle, the topic of the publication, but in the opinion of the author, has a somewhat dull, simple and standard appearance. The color scheme of this version of the screen cannot fully fulfill the task of motivation the target audience, which is young people, cadet students of predominantly male gender, and the requirements of the customer for creating a modern design. This conclusion was made based on the analysis of research conducted by a team of marketers and designers from the creative agency Designed It to study the psychology of color and its impact on consumers. These studies identified the most popular colors among men and by age. A comparative analysis of the research conducted by the design team and the color scheme of the sketch of the main screen of the project textbook shows that neither the colors that prevail in the saturation intensity in the RGB color gamma when creating the color uniform and step red-green, nor the colors close to them brown for uniform and green for the step, as can be seen from the diagrams, are not popular among male youth. Thus, the question arose of how to change the color scheme to revitalize the design of the screens, make it more modern, attractive and original, while not violating the approach to graphic design in the visual communication of the armed forces of Ukraine. The way to solve this problem was to create a harmonious combination of colors with a similar saturation, creating a saturation contrast, uniform and step, by radial gradient filling of the screen background. In this version of the home screen, the gradient background makes the interface look restrained and not boring. The screen has become more lively and attractive to the target audience. It was on the cover screen that the requirement to display elements of symbolism, the logo of Armed Forces of Ukraine and the Military Law Institute of the Yaroslav Mudry National Law University was implemented. The idea of creating the color scheme of the cover screen is based on the contrast of diametrical opposite colors, yellow and blue as a symbol of the national flag of Ukraine, green as a symbol of the military, the battlefield, with the effect of blurring them. The problem of using only the basic communication font of the Armed Forces of Ukraine UAF stands for typography was solved by using different sizes of this font, pins for emphasis and changing the stroke. The italics of the font could be created using two capabilities of Figma to tilt the letters. Thus, the introduction of the graphic style of the Armed Forces of Ukraine into the design of electronic multimedia textbook, tactical training, mechanized squad, taking into account the subject matter of the publication and the interests of the target audience, can be done in the ways given above. Thanks for your attention.